It's the most common investment right now for Gen Z. Anyone under the age of 24, the most common thing that they are investing in is cryptocurrency.
Welcome to Radio Davos, the podcast from the World Economic Forum that looks at the biggest challenges and how we might solve them. This week, where do you invest your money and whose advice do you take? We speak to the director of a movie that follows online influencers, including one who made and lost millions in crypto.
I literally took everything out of my bank accounts, sold all my stock, maxed out 2 credit cards, and took out cash advances and threw it all into Dogecoin.
Recently rallied to be worth more than Kraft Foods, and it has no product.
I just became a millionaire by spending all my money on Dogecoin.
The movie, This Is Not Financial Advice, is a fascinating look into the real lives of people chasing the highs.
Dogecoin is a joke? His millions are not.
And hitting the lows.
I'm the brokest millionaire you know. If you guys know how much money I had in my bank account, you'd laugh.
Of investing online. The movie maker is taking his film into schools and colleges around the US to encourage awareness and spark discussion about financial literacy.
Whoever's listening to this, sure, they may have this opportunity to get rich quick. Most people will lose.
And we hear words of wisdom from the World Economic Forum's Center for Financial and Monetary Systems.
Make sure that you're using multiple sources before you put your money into anything, and don't put it all into one thing.
Subscribe to Radio Davos wherever you get your podcasts, or visit wef.ch/podcasts, where you'll also find Meet the Leader and Agenda Dialogues. I'm Robin Palmer at the World Economic Forum, and with this look at the world of online investing,
I would sell no later than tomorrow.
Not selling.
This is Radio Davos. Investing is no longer the reserve of the city boys on Wall Street. Anyone with a few dollars to spare and a smartphone can put their cash into pretty much anything. And there's no shortage of advice online, which can be a good thing, but also has risks of its own. On this episode, we're talking to the director of a documentary that takes a close and personal look at the world of online investing and of finfluencers. And before we start, here's a teaser trailer for the movie called This Is Not Financial Advice.
We live in a time where people have lost faith in institutions, that the system isn't fair to them.
Like 10% of people hold 70% of the stocks in the stock market.
We don't know about that, you know?
We come with this dream, shake a tree and money's gonna fall.
I can understand why somebody says, I'm gonna do it my own way, and there are other people like me, and we're gonna go against the rules.
I'm Kayla, also known as Girls Talk Stocks.
I'm trying to be a voice of reason for people who want to enter this space, and now I feel like it's more volatile than I'd expected.
I just dropped 300,000.
Oh my
You lost $5,000, 1,000, however much you invested. I lost millions.
And cut.
And joined from New York by a co-host, Meagan Andrews, who's lead capital market initiatives at the World Economic Forum. Hi, Meagan.
Hi, Robin. Thanks for having me.
Thanks for joining us. Tell us, what is the role of lead capital market initiatives at the World Economic Forum?
Very good question. So essentially, I lead a lot of our research around any capital market trend or something that we want to dive into. And increasingly, over the last few years, we've really turned our eye towards individual financial well-being as a really important topic for us to explore. And so that's what we spent a lot of time doing over the last few years, looking at the rise of retail investors, looking at the importance of tools and services like financial advice for individuals, and a whole host of other things like financial education and literacy that are also really important.
You're talking about financial advice. The subject of this podcast will be This Is Not Financial Advice. Tell us who our guest is on this podcast.
All right, Chris, let me know how I do, but I'm really delighted to have Chris Temple join us today. So Chris is a film director and founder of Optimist, which is a non-profit studio based in Los Angeles in the US. Now, Chris, your films have been released globally by Netflix, HBO, Hulu, and PBS. You're best known for directing many films, including Living on $1, Salam Neighbor, and 5 Years North. And most recently, and importantly for today's episode, you directed a feature film titled This Is Not Financial Advice, which really explores the psychology of retail investing, social media, FOMO, in the modern digital era. How is that, Chris?
You did great. Thank you.
Great to meet you, Chris. So you made this documentary, This Is Not Financial Advice. How do you describe the movie to people?
I think the film is a roller coaster ride into the last few years of how technology is changing our relationship to money. So, how are we seeing the rise of phone apps, zero commission trading, social media affecting all of us in our relationship to money and how we invest, save, and get access to financial information.
I've seen the film. It's a lot of fun. That we have to stress that. For anyone thinking, well, should I watch a film about financial advice? Well, it's not financial advice. It's a documentary, but it's definitely got well-formed real-life characters. And the main character is a young man called, am I saying his name right? Glauber Conte Soto. Is that right?
That's correct. Yep.
And he's also known as the Dogecoin Millionaire. Tell us something about Glauber and who he is and why you decided to turn your camera on him.
Yeah, so, the film is fun and entertaining because we wanted to provide an entry point for people to have this conversation and in many ways compete with the entertaining YouTube videos where people are getting their current financial advice and information. So, I spent the last 3 years interviewing financial experts, academics, psychologists, wealth advisors to kind of synthesize all of this information into what we hope is a very engaging film. And the way we did it was instead of having, talking heads explain stuff to you through the whole film, we focus on 4 individuals and their relationships to money. So they all come from different walks of life, have different risk profiles as all of us do. And then I hope, each viewer can kind of connect to different parts of each one of their stories. So the main one that we focus in on is someone who I met on Twitter. I saw a post that he put out saying he had maxed out his credit cards, he'd taken out cash advances, sold all his stocks, and put all of his life savings into Dogecoin, which is a cryptocurrency that was actually started as a joke to make fun of Bitcoin. To me, I found this fascinating. We jumped on a call later that afternoon and then began filming the following day, really just trying to answer the question of why was he making this kind of decision? And the answers we came to were actually much more complex than I imagined when I began. It would be easy to write him off as an idiot, but I think there's much more systemic factors at play that were driving Glauber to make this decision. But, to give you a bit of a spoiler for the film, we watch him take this investment and ride it up to $1 million in Dogecoin.
So that's from an investment, I think, of $80,000 he managed to scrape together, right?
Yeah, $180,000 that he put together. And then his whole life savings, everything, borrowing from others, he rides it up to $1 million. You'd think, 5x your return, he's gonna sell, right? And take some gains on that, at least get his initial investment out. No, for many reasons that we'll get into, Glauber holds on to this investment, rides it up to 2 million, then 2 million to 3 million, still refusing to sell. And the next thing you know, the market begins to turn around, as that happens in all markets, but especially in a very volatile market like the cryptocurrency markets. These can rise and fall in a single day. He loses $1 million in an hour on a Dogecoin price fluctuation. But then at that point, a whole new set of psychological triggers come into play, and he doesn't want to sell it 2 because it used to be 3, right? So, I think we use this extreme example of Pro's situation, he calls himself Pro, of Pro's situation to talk about and illuminate the factors that all of us will face as new investors in financial markets.
It's extraordinary. I mean, why did he get into it in the first place? I mean, I've heard of Dogecoin. It's been around quite a while now. Why did he pick that one? Do you know?
Yeah, so a couple really interesting things started coming to light the more we filmed with him. I mean, I think one, and in many ways his primary motivator for getting into this, was honestly frustration with the system of wealth inequality, with his lack of access to traditional financial markets. So, Pro is a undocumented immigrant here in the US. So he's had a lot of trouble getting and holding stable jobs. When he got to college, he was denied entry due to lack of papers. And I think there was just a significant frustration that, in the US, and this is a global problem, but, in the US, 50% of Americans don't have $500 of savings at any given time. And I think this driving drumbeat of frustration was a number one factor. 2, I think the social media elements and the community that was built around Dogecoin became a really, really big factor for him. So, he started talking about this online, and he found a community of hundreds of thousands of other people who were encouraging him.
And of followers as well, right? He became kind of a leading light for other investors.
Yeah, and I definitely want to get into that more too, of then his role of amplifying other people to invest. But, I think he was a really lonely guy who lived in a studio apartment in Hollywood, 180 square feet, and he finally had people paying attention to him. And that feels really, really good, and became very difficult for him to leave that community, because it felt like a bit of a betrayal to sell the Dogecoin when his identity was so tied to this single financial asset.
You follow him in his home life, and he has a very, very modest, for someone who's worth $3 million at one point, he's deliberately living as frugally as he possibly can, because everything he's got is going into this investment.
To bring you into his room for a moment, it's this tiny thing. It's basically just a bed in a room here that he found on Craigslist for free. It used to be bunk beds because he had a roommate in this single room studio. And I think it's important because it's the psychological profile that he had too is a big part here, where, his risk-taking mentality was to the extreme. And it wasn't just from a financial standpoint. Everything that he did was to the extremes, whether it was living frugally or, a funny part of the film is he gets really into celery juice because he reads online that, celery juice is a way to be healthy, right? So every single day he drinks 48 ounces of homemade celery juice, which is double the amount that's recommended. But in his mind, as he says in the film, if celery juice is good for you, then more must be better, right? And I think that more must be better mentality is something that not only has affected pro, but I think is a cultural shift that we've seen affecting millions of young people, hundreds of millions of young people all over the world, especially who want things now.
It's a story of the American dream, isn't it, in some ways? Because it surprised me, you drop that bit of information halfway through, that what you've already said, he's an undocumented immigrant from Brazil. He's there with his mother. Because up until that point, I, as not an American, was thinking, here you go. Here's an American kid, in his shorts and his beard, hanging out. But it's kind of, in his case, he's literally what the Americans call a dreamer, right? Is that a dreamer in America?
Exactly. Yeah.
The idea that you can arrive with nothing and make your fortune. I don't think, the founding fathers or whoever developed that myth had in mind Dogecoin or this kind of thing. But there is that element to this story, isn't there?
Well, I think it's part of what makes it hard to not root for him during the movie. When you hear from and why a great movie always has complex characters, right? And why I loved him. You see his mom, who's working as a house cleaner and has been here for 25 years, working really hard to raise her son and try to put him through college. And yet he hasn't been able to find a legal pathway to citizenship here, even though he came as a 4-year-old child. We can do a whole other episode on America's broken immigration system, but I think it all contributes to that frustration that I think has fueled a lot of the markets that we're seeing in financial behavior, whether that's GameStop that we've seen talked about, where people are trying to rally together to pump up certain stocks and stick it to the man, right? Take down Wall Street. A lot of this lingo is fueled psychologically, but also then social media plays a really big role in amplifying that collectively around the internet.
It's such an interesting look at markets. I think the GameStop one's really interesting, but also going back to Dogecoin, in the film we see there's a very exciting moment for all the investors in Dogecoin, because Elon Musk has tweeted that he's a fan of it and he's about to go on the comedy show Saturday Night Live. Correct me if I'm getting any of this wrong. And they've got the TV on and they've got the graph showing the price of Dogecoin, and just him coming on, does it go up? But then when in his opening monologue, he doesn't happen to mention Dogecoin. This is the guy that owns Tesla and SpaceX. He's got a lot going on, but the market doesn't like the fact he's not mentioned Dogecoin. It starts to dip. And in a way, you could have a laugh at it and you can sneer at it a bit, but in a way, this is sometimes how markets work. I've covered financial markets as a journalist, and markets, at least in the very short term, do rise and fall, even on, a comment that wasn't quite what was expected from the central bank chief, for example. These tiny little things can influence that. I mean, what did you make of this, waiting for this speech on Saturday Night Live by Elon Musk? It was in a way bizarre, but in a way they were right. This would affect the price of this asset.
The more bizarre, the more engaged people are getting, right? I mean, you look at this applying outside of financial markets in the States right now to our own presidential election or whatever it may be. The internet is fueling the absurd and the extreme. And I think Elon Musk is a great example of somebody who has that kind of power to shift markets, but whether that's traditional markets or crypto markets. But why the crypto markets and the current phenomenon, I think, is amplified is that crypto trading is 24/7 around the clock, any hour of any minute people can be in there. It's the most common investment right now for Gen Z. So, anyone under the age of 24, the most common thing that they are investing in is cryptocurrency. And so, part of what we wanted to do here with the film was to spark these conversations for young people to increase in a non-judgmental way through a film that can kind of be entertaining and an educational entry point to think about the role of financial advice online and people like Elon Musk, to think about the future of crypto trading and why it might be more speculative or dangerous. And to, I think the most important one, third, is to think about your own relationship to money and your own psychological profile to risk, because so many of us never have that conversation with ourselves of what is my risk profile? What are my goals with money? And if you don't define that, then when you start seeing someone on the internet saying, hey, you can make $1 million in an hour on crypto, it might feel really tempting with FOMO, your fear of missing out. And the next thing you know, you've made a really bad financial decision. So our hope is that this film can really help a lot of people. And it's helped me, honestly. Making this film was has been a hugely educational process for me to come to terms with my own relationship with risk and FOMO.
Meagan, this is not financial advice. What is the World Economic Forum when it's talking about personal finance? What are you discovering? And do you have any words of advice for people who might be tempted to follow influencers online?
There are a number of things that we look at when we think about improving an individual's financial well-being state. And so just to quickly define what that means, financial well-being means that an individual is able to meet current and ongoing financial needs, as well as feel secure in their financial future. So to do that, there's a whole stack of tools, products, and services that they need to be able to dip into to make the best financial decision for them. There are, of course, a number of limiting factors like financial education and financial literacy, which Chris, I hope, will dive into soon. But we know that global financial literacy levels, for example, are about 35%, which is just too low. And we really need a revolution in how we think about financial education. And I think that's one thing that we'll dive into today, but that we're giving a lot of thought to. But more fundamentally to this conversation, we spent the last 6 to 9 months actually diving deep on financial advice specifically. And in fact, social media is a really big, important part of that because it's allowing people access to financial information. Now, one big caveat I'm going to throw in right here, we make a distinction between financial information and financial advice. So financial information is a very kind of one-to-many way of distributing information, like what you see on social media and financial influencers or finfluencers. And that is not necessarily regulated content. They're not necessarily credentialed individuals giving some of this information. And that is very distinct from financial advice, which is provided by a regulated professional specific to you and your financial needs. And so that's really critical. It's one-to-many to very tailored to you. And what we find, financial advice is really can be such an important tool for people. Studies have shown, for example, here in the US, that a holistic approach to financial advice can save the average household about 7.5% of their annual income. And that's when you think about, tax planning, when you think about financial planning, pension saving, whatever it might be, that holistic approach. But, something that has limited financial advice historically is a bit of a misconception around what it is, how expensive it is. People are also really intimidated. They don't know how to get started. And so these access barriers are really hard to break down. And that's where social media has played a really important role. And we have to acknowledge some of those benefits, because I think, Chris, we've dived into some of the challenges that we've seen in terms of how people deal with this risk. But there are also, our research shows that, there are some people there to game the market, but it's not the majority. People are there for the long term to try to save for long-term financial goals too. And so social media gives them a way to access that sort of content, that information that they would not otherwise have access to. And that's a really powerful conduit. So that's a few of the things we've been thinking about.
One of the other subjects in the film is one of these people on TikTok and YouTube is providing financial information. Her name is Kayla. She goes by the handle Girls Talk Stocks. And for her, she explains her story of beginning to do this work because she found the terms that were used in finance to be really exclusionary, the culture around it to be very difficult to get into if you were a young female or just wanted to learn more. And so she started putting out information on her own TikTok that were answering, what could be perceived as simple financial terms or simple elements like, what is compound interest? Let's go into that and talk about this in case maybe someone didn't teach you. And, as you said, Meagan, only a very small number, what do you say, 35% of people have any form of financial education globally. In the US, it's a pitiful excuse for financial education at the high school level. And so I think she's meeting a really interesting need within the US of providing an outlet for those to get information. And again, I think how we talk about it in the film is the information that Kayla is providing or the conversation that she's starting is a spark, right? It's, hey, have you thought about compound interest? Let me talk to you for 2 minutes in a TikTok video about this, make it really digestible, easy to understand. Now maybe you're going to be curious enough to dig deeper, or to take another step, or to watch another video. And I think that's where social media can be really, really helpful as an onboarding ramp for people to get access to this sort of stuff. And I think it was for me where, that's where I was an economics major. I was never a filmmaker, yet I didn't know very simple things about how to invest or deal with my financial future. I didn't even know that I needed to invest my Roth IRA into a fund of some kind. I'd just been putting money in it and assuming it was gonna.
That's the pension fund, right?
Yeah, exactly. It's equivalent of a retirement fund in the U.S. And and no one's teaching you that stuff until I started watching some of these videos online.
Kayla's very interesting, and she seems very skeptical of Dogecoin. She does some kind of sketch with the door. I can't remember what happens, but really she's almost mocking the crypto bros there in one or two of her videos. Is that right?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, part of why she started doing the videos that she did is she felt, again, the culture of crypto and she describes it as bro-y or not, not welcoming to new community members to be able to learn about finance. And I think it's not just crypto. I think, obviously we've seen this culturally talked about on Wall Street for many, many years in other films like Wolf of Wall Street or other examples of that over the years. So I understand where she's coming from.
And Chris, maybe to add, I think what's really interesting about Kayla is I think that the followers that she's accumulating, it's because of her kind of relatability and authenticity. At one point in the film, I think she makes a call out for any women who are investing in the stock market to DM her. So I think that point around social media and what we've also found in our research, that relatability point is really connecting with people, particularly a growing diverse population of investors. And changing demographics is one trend that we've looked at. And we know that the demographics, we're becoming more diverse. There's more women, there's more people of color that hold wealth than ever before. These people have traditionally been excluded from financial markets, and so they're looking for somewhere to go that they feel comfortable and they can relate to the person providing the information. And I think that's something that industry needs to take heed of as well. When they think about the services they provide, how do they adapt to that changing demographic base beyond, social media being the channel for that? How do they actually better serve these diverse population who have diverse needs and financial goals?
This notion of getting financial information rather than advice from TikTok or any other social media is that there's going to be lots of it because anyone can post anything they like and it's completely unregulated. And I don't imagine it could ever really be regulated on a platform like that. So, I mean, do either of you have advice? If I'm just going to kind of search on the internet, I want to find these fun people who are going to teach me stuff and maybe help me in some way. But how do I sort the ones that are useful to me from, I'm sure there's many people out there pumping up stocks or any kind of asset because they hold a lot of it and they want the price to go up. And if you're going to sell it, you're hurting their asset. There must be countless people out there. I mean, how do I know if I'm dealing with someone who's kind of got my best interests at heart online?
I think it begins with media literacy in the same way that you look at what is a legitimate news source or not. And I think trying to broaden how we're talking about that term across social media platforms as well and into financial literacy will, I think is the key. And it's helping people identify some basic elements. I think one, is this video sponsored? If it is sponsored, by who? Who is that? Who has the incentive to be teaching me this information? Two, what is the background of the individual I'm hearing information from? Maybe click around a little bit, understand if they have done other videos, they have any sort of formal training, who follows them, some of the things about, who this person truly is. And then, in the US, something that FINRA is actually trying to do, which is the financial regulatory body agency here in the US, is instead of trying to regulate the actual social media players themselves, which is very, very difficult, they're targeting the sponsors of YouTube content and trying to hold them accountable to only be providing sponsorship to people who are not providing a risk or misinformation to the individuals that that are receiving that information. It's kind of an interesting entry point through which to provide an intervention because if you cut off the chokehold of the financials, it can really I think will have an effect down the line on the people who are able to continue to give advice online. And then I think the third one is, be very aware of the promises that someone's making you. If someone's telling you, you're going to 1,000x your return, or if it's too good to be true, it might be.
In the film, there's a lot of the characters kind of go fully in on one product. And I think like the basics of, financial education is around diversified portfolio, making sure you're balancing the risks across the way that you're allocating your money. And I think, making some smart decisions there, but also critically using a lot of information sources before you make a decision. And we know from our research that, there's not that many people that purely use social media as their only source of information. They usually go to multiple sources, whether that's a financial advisor or other kind of deeper research or desk-based research. Although I do think there is one study in the UK done by the regulatory authority there that found that about 23% of people are only using social media. So I think there is a lesson there actually that, make sure that you're using multiple sources before you put your money into anything and don't put it all into one thing.
Talking of great statistics, Meagan, this is another one. There's World Economic Forum data on people saying they felt they understood the risk with crypto to a greater extent than a bond.
Yeah.
Can you tell me anything more about that?
Yeah, this is a survey we launched back in 2022. And we're actually relaunching that survey this year as a bit of a teaser for our listeners. If you want to get an update on that data, tune in later in the year. But we actually asked people about how well they felt they understood the risk of different products. And people said they understood the risk more of crypto than a bond, which is a fixed income asset. So there's kind of a fixed return that you get at regular intervals with the bond. So in terms of understanding the risk, very straightforward. But our hypothesis there is this familiarity point, that people hearing about crypto, and that I guess the role of social media, it plays a big role there too, makes people feel like they understand a product more. But that's one hypothesis we have. I'm sure there's many researchers who are also looking at this in much greater detail, but it was a really intriguing finding from our survey.
That's fascinating.
Yeah, it's not exactly the same question as saying, do you think crypto is less risky than a bond, or vice versa? So it might be that you could understand the risk. The risk is massive with crypto. Bonds, I'm not sure. Maybe they're answering that to the question.
Perhaps. I think that fundamentally, this familiarity with the asset plays a big role.
Chris, you didn't want to give spoilers away. You leave the end of the movie thinking, what happened to some of the characters there, particularly of Pro, you call him, right?
Yeah.
So the Dogecoin millionaire. I actually have Googled him to look to find out what happened to Pro next. But are you able to tell us? Because you are worried. You are rooting for the guy, right?
Yeah.
You might find him misguided, and some of his decisions a little strange. But he seems such a nice guy, and he doesn't seem to be doing it for any of the wrong reasons. And it looks like he just lost $3 million.
Yeah. So, yeah, I really like Pro. I think he's a great guy. I think he gets very caught up, as others do, in FOMO. I get this fear of missing out, social comparisons to others, the basic psychological traps that we all are susceptible to in investing. Pro is an extreme example of that. And I think for him, his investment went from $3 million down to $2 million, down to $1 million, still isn't selling it, down to $500,000, and eventually by the end of the film back down to his original investment. And, to me, I was like, okay, well, is he going to learn his lesson here? And, I think we see this with most people going through the process of investing for the first time. You get smarter, you start diversifying. I'm a huge optimist, and I think people's capacity to learn and believe and get better in financial markets. And it's honestly what I expected of Pro, but this is a documentary. This is real life. I can't write the script of what happens. And I think the really surprising turn for me in the third act of this film was that in many ways he was rewarded for his very risky behavior. And what I mean by that is he started getting sponsorships from crypto companies, from different crypto coins, from a Dogecoin credit card, from a number of different somewhat seedy financial products, that realized that because Pro was so extreme, he was getting featured on the front page of the New York Times. He'd amassed a following of almost 500,000 on YouTube and Twitter. And he was fun and entertaining, so he had eyeballs. And in the current attention economy, eyeballs are money. And so the turn that I never saw coming was that Pro actually, while he lost all of his investment, he started making money from sponsorships and has amassed almost, close to $750,000 in sponsorship money from different crypto coins and others. In what I think is one of the most dangerous parts of this film is that he is now shilling crypto coins on his YouTube channel and telling people to buy different products or coins that are called meme coins or speculative investments. And he gets paid to do that. And, whoever's listening to this, sure, they may have this opportunity to get rich quick. Most people will lose. and those who were early on, including pro, are the ones who are making the money. And so, I've confronted him about this multiple times. We've talked on a number of podcasts and, tours around the U.S. at film screenings about this conversation. And to him, he thinks he deserves to make money. He's like, people should be smart enough to know what they're buying when they watch my videos. And that's his attitude. And I just think it's a dangerous kind of societal and cultural phenomenon that we're seeing happening on YouTube with that.
Meagan, you have a question for Chris.
We've touched on this a lot throughout the conversation around the importance of financial literacy and financial education. And we know from our research that there's a lot of empirical links between offering financial education courses in high school and college and improved credit rating scores, improved debt management, etc. You're actually on the ground doing this in some US colleges. Is that right? Could you tell us a little bit about how that's going?
Yeah, so a big goal with the film at its core is this conversation around financial education. So we're doing a couple things. One, we've split the film into modules that we're releasing online for free to any teacher globally who wants to use it. So it's kind of around different learning lessons, around risk, around diversification, and any teacher can come to our website, This Is Not Financial Advice, and find that for free. Another thing that we're doing is we partnered with FINRA to do a college tour. So we're going and we're doing screenings and workshops and Q&A events to talk about financial education, where it's really been at the request of college students who say, hey, we don't have classes that are teaching us this stuff. Very few high schools are providing financial education. So how do we go and use the film as an entry point to spark this conversation on college campuses? Because it's more entertaining. It can be that. Again, I always call films sparks because the point is that in 90 minutes, it's not going to teach you everything about financial education, but it's the first source or maybe entry point for you to ask these questions about your own relationship to money. And then you can go take a class, you can watch a YouTube video, you can read a book, you can diversify all the sources of financial information that you're getting. And FINRA has been really, really helpful in providing those additional resources. They have a whole slate of information. So it's something that's been a really rewarding part of the work for us to go have these conversations with people in a non-judgmental way where, again, I've gotten caught up into all of these same traps that I'm talking about here. I'm not saying any of this in a judgmental way. The film does not look down upon someone for making a poor financial decision. Any of us are susceptible to this stuff. There's real systemic and cultural factors that make it very, very difficult for people to navigate their money. And I think when I look at the future and we talk about on college campuses with students, I'm extremely optimistic about how much people are learning, their interest in learning about financial education. And I think people will only get smarter and only get better. And I hope so, because if we have any shot at challenging the wealth inequality problem globally, it's going to be through financial education. In the US here, 90% of stocks are owned by 10% of Americans. It's a fundamental problem, and we need to welcome in more and more people from diverse audiences to gain access to financial markets and hopefully provide them a ladder, not just a trampoline, which is, how people are looking at some of these crypto investments.
So people can get some of that at the website. This is not financial advice.
Yeah, if you just Google the film, you can find it. But also if you come to tinfafilm.com is our website, or on social media. But really just Google our film and you'll find a whole slate of free resources.
And if someone wants to watch the whole movie?
The film is available online and globally in most markets. So you can find it on Apple TV, Amazon. It's releasing soon also on YouTube Movies, Tubi. We're putting it anywhere and everywhere because the goal is that people can see it.
Chris, really enjoyed the film. Congratulations on it. It's been a critical success. Meagan, thanks to you for joining us from New York. And Chris, thanks to you for joining us on Radio Davos.
Yeah, really appreciate it. Hope you all enjoy the film.
Chris Temple, his film is called This Is Not Financial Advice. Links to that in the show notes to this episode. You also heard Meagan Andrews from the World Economic Forum's Centre for Financial and Monetary Systems. Find out more about what they do on our website. If you enjoyed this episode, please tell your friends, please repost it on your social media, and maybe leave us a rating. And you can send us comments on the World Economic Forum Podcast Club on Facebook. Find our whole back catalogue, that's more than 200 episodes of Radio Davos, wherever you listen to this, and at wef.ch/podcast, where you'll also find our sister shows, Meet the Leader and Agenda Dialogues. This episode of Radio Davos was written and presented by me, Robin Pomeroy. Studio production was by Taz Kelleher. We'll be back next week, but for now, thanks to you for listening, and goodbye.